If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. You are listening to the Jonbenet Ramsey series. This is episode 6, The Neighborhood. We will be examining various friends and neighbors and the neighborhood itself surrounding the home of the Ramseys and why there are so many loose ends regarding the Christmas party, regarding the guest list, regarding the other Christmas party. There's just so much to unravel. And there's so much intertwined with these unanswered questions that are all very mind-shocking. And then we'll also be taking a look at some deathbed confessions implicating particular neighbors. All very, very bizarre, and we'll be taking a look at it all in typical MINDSHOCK fashion, with logic and reason, objectivity at the forefront, not falling for logical fallacies or any biases like all these other podcasts fall for. Because the truth is, of course, unknown. And we'll be taking a look at other possibilities, including the ransom note not even being written in the house that morning. So there's a lot to go over and a lot that has not been gone over yet, and we don't know which one of these things might be the smoking gun in unraveling this perplexing true crime case, which many consider the most famous true crime case. As always, if you enjoy the podcast and find it informative, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help support the channel. Help us get more mind-shocking episodes out in faster frequency and cover even more cases in typical MINDSHOCK fashion. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. If it's still glitching, you could just go to youtube.com/MINDSHOCK to manually check when the latest episodes are released and peruse our ever-growing back catalog. If you found this episode interesting, hit that like button, share it across social media platforms. And, of course, justice delayed is justice denied. There are people interested in solving not just this case, but other cold cases, and awareness, of course, is key. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. And you could also check us out on Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for a case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. All right, so what are we going to look at first? Let's address the issue of the Christmas parties. So, of course, there were multiple Christmas parties. There was the party at the Ramseys, which was December 23rd, 1996, from approximately 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. And there was also the party from that particular night at the Whites' residence, which they were returning from. Some people theorize that Jonbenet Ramsey might have been killed at the Whites' Christmas party or elsewhere than the Ramsey home, and there was some kind of cover-up. And she was already dead arriving at the home, or perhaps not dead, but injured in some capacity. So, yeah, the other thing we really didn't discuss is how unusual is it that the Ramsey dog, Jonbenet Ramsey's dog, was ushered off to a neighbor's house, therefore not inside the home able to, I don't want to say the word assist, but per se, alert, bark like crazy, perhaps deter a burglar or intruder, or at least, at the very least, some kind of alert, some kind of a ruckus that could have been caused that might have altered the events that transpired? Or is this simply another long line of coincidences? I know coincidence theorists are attracted to the Jonbenet Ramsey case, in large numbers, similar to conspiracy theorists, aka critical thinkers, who are not willing to just believe that every single coincidence is just a coincidence, no matter how high the stack goes. And we'll be examining a number of coincidences. Now, I've discussed this in the past, but there was also this mysterious 911 call on the 23rd that was supposedly a mistaken 911 call. Is this another coincidence? So how often do people accidentally call 911? Obviously it happens. How often does it happen at the scene of a crime within 48 hours? Again, it's really, really bizarre. So I'll just go over a couple sources for this 911 call. So this is 6:48 p.m. on December 23rd, 1996. Someone from the Ramsey residence. So again, the Christmas party is approximately 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Now, obviously, we don't have exact timestamps. People could have lingered after, I suppose. Anyway, this call came in 6:48 p.m. to 911. So there were quite a few people there. So some rumors are that Fleet White was placing an international call. So this has never been corroborated in any capacity. I'm not sure where these rumors came from. But if you're calling internationally, you would use 01 or 101 or 011, whatever the number is. So is it possible someone missed? And again, it is Christmas time, so it's not out of the question that perhaps he has family vacationing in another country or living in another country. These are reasonably wealthy people in Boulder, Colorado, but let's go to the sources here. So this is Washington Post, January 1997. According to Washington Post, which quoted an unnamed source, Boulder police have been told the call was made by a drunken guest attending a Christmas party hosted by the child's parents. The Post reported Friday that the source close to the family described the call as irrelevant. And that's another curiosity, because that would mean they would definitively know exactly what happened with the call. Otherwise, how would they know whether it was relevant or not? Or they're covering something up and they know it is relevant. The December 23rd call ended before the police dispatcher could talk to the person on the line. After calling back, getting voicemail, police sent an officer to the home, according to police records examined Thursday by the Associated Press. So this is January 97, this is being reported. The officer left minutes later and did not file a report. So, again, as I have speculated in earlier episodes, if Ramsey connected to Lockheed Martin and some of these higher-up government officials in some capacity, however many degrees of separation one wishes to employ or consider relevant, not relevant, coincidental, as coincidence theorists love to claim everything's just coincidence, no matter how many there are. But is it possible they were having some kind of satanic rites, even as a joke at the party? I mean, again, the coincidence theorists always love to write off any and all possibilities of Satanism or the occult. I mean, they just completely write them off and ignorantly don't want to even look at any evidence in that direction. They consider it a complete waste of time. And that if that is what happened, then that's what happened. Now, whether it was as a goof or whatever, and they didn't want police to see that, or there really was, as the rumor mill goes, there were several people connected with, again, exploitation of children in various capacities, from the photographer Jonbenet Ramsey to other individuals in the area. And then, of course, in the post-Epstein era, it's no longer as crazy as the cognitive dissonant coincidence theorists love to pretend in the pre-Epstein era. So post-Epstein, obviously now that it's known, post-Epstein, Maxwell era, Jill Zane Maxwell, it's known that people, these high-ranking government officials, billionaires, multimillionaires, the corporate elite, so to speak, might have connections to exploiting children in some kind of capacity or some kind of satanic rites or sacrifices. Again, Bohemian Grove, which Alex Jones exposed with some upper level elites. Now, again, John Ramsey is obviously not on the top of that pyramid. But is it possible he rubs shoulders with individuals who are? Again, with his Lockheed connections. So, what was going on at that Christmas party? Perhaps it was an innocent party. Perhaps it was an innocent drunken phone call. But if you weren't there, you don't know for sure. So again, this is mind shock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. So and again, some people believe the police were involved in some kind of capacity as well. Not all the officers, just possibly one or two high-ranking individuals in the police department. In the Death of Innocence book, page 97, during the party, Fleet White used our phone to make a series of calls, trying to get some medicine to his mother in a hospital in Aspen, Colorado. Apparently, he dialed wrong and got 911 instead of 411. The police called back, but after checking with Fleet and the rest of the people in the house, Susan Stein informed them that the call was a mistake. So there is, wow, okay. This is really, really bizarre because, first of all, I don't know if Fleet White ever on the record confirmed to making that call. The other thing that does this pass the smell test? If you're really worried about getting medicine to your mother at the hospital, would you just go off gallivanting to a Christmas party, or would you actually take care of your business before you went to the party, possibly not even go to the party at all? Now, the counterpoint there is if somehow someone else informed him that his mother had just been rushed to the hospital, that's not what it says here. It's saying he's trying to get medicine to his mother. It doesn't say he was just informed while he was at the party. So again, if any of that is even true, who knows? But again, this is mind shock. We're not going to take anything on blind faith from any source, because how do we know if it's true or not? We have to logically examine this. So Susan Stein was the one that supposedly opened the door to the police officer very slightly, as if trying to obscure what was going on inside the house. So a lot of different theories here. Now, what's bizarre is that they didn't want the police to see that all these people there was a lot of drunk people there, and there were also children there. But that's a common occurrence at any party, let alone a holiday party. It's not like they were letting the children get drunk. So, in any case, they did not allow the officer in. And also what's interesting is supposedly neither one of the Ramseys came to the door. So there's just random people using their phone and coming to the door. Were they otherwise preoccupied? What was going on in the house? I don't know. Again, I'm a big advocate of the brain fingerprint scan technology. I don't know why more people aren't. I will obviously be doing a dedicated episode on that for people that are unaware. The brain fingerprint scan technology is simply technology that measures your brain waves in response to information. So it's completely irrelevant whether you're trying to deceive or you're trying to tell the truth. It bypasses all of that. It takes that completely out of the equation. So either you recognize information or you do not. And there's a $100,000 reward for beating this brain fingerprint scan. Nobody's beat it yet. And this is used in upper levels of military and the government as well. CIA, all of these other organizations use it because it's accurate. It's not this old-timey polygraph, which simply measures whether or not you're nervous and not exactly the truth. So, yeah, again, it's weird. It's weird. So some people theorize that whoever harmed Jonbenet Ramsey or if there was some other type of plot to extort John Ramsey for either his Christmas bonus of $118,000, or otherwise individuals that were targeting the Ramsey family for whatever reason, either at the time they planned to harm Jonbenet or not, or planned to kidnap or maybe planned just to kidnap with a ransom and were planning to return her unharmed, or whether this was all just going to be a threat never executed, or whatever, maybe just a home invasion. Maybe it's one party, maybe it's multiple parties. Either way, would someone call 911 from the house to see how long it would take the police to respond? So, again, this would point to people doing some serious recon, and for whatever reason being super confident that they would never be found out. Again, if it was a really bustling Christmas party and there were a ton of people there, they were very confident that they wouldn't be found out. Now, were they someone already on the guest list? Or was this a +1? Or was this someone who just wandered in? Or was it an uninvited neighbor who was known to the Ramseys and they didn't have a problem with them necessarily coming to the Christmas party? They were friendly. Maybe they forgot to invite them. Maybe they weren't necessarily official invitations and it was all good. Maybe they didn't care how many neighbors showed up or not. I don't know. I wasn't there. So would someone be doing a police response check? Because again, this is a relatively affluent neighborhood. So they know that the police responds in this type of neighborhood, unlike other types of neighborhoods elsewhere in the country where the police might not respond at all, or they would take their sweet time. So they might have been doing a check, but again, police response times vary, but they might have wanted to get a general idea and then maybe shave off a few minutes for insurance time for whatever they were plotting. So again, I don't know. This would easily be able to be checked, though, because if Fleet White did really call about getting medication to his mother at the hospital, there would be a record of the call that was made. Because if he was claiming that that's what he was doing, he messed up a call, there would still be a record of the actual legitimate call that wasn't accidentally dialing 911. So it'd be curious if anybody ever nailed that down. It's weird, though. It's a little weird for the way that Stein handled that. Oh, it's definitely a mistake. How did they know it was a mistake? What if there was a real accident in the home? What if a kid was hurt? Would your first instinct maybe just ask one or two drunk people, oh yeah, it's definitely an accident, instead of an actual thorough, did they actually go to each individual, account for every child? If they did, they did. Then it's not as curious. But if they simply checked with only the people around them and then while barely opening the door, having the door open only a slight crack for the police officer, and then saying, oh, no, it was a mistake. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if somebody's lying dead somewhere and they're shooing the police away? It's just bizarre. It's a little bizarre. I don't know how the coincidence theorists would sweep that under the rug without a second thought. So how would innocent parties behave in that respect? I mean, they might not necessarily want to would you let a police officer in during a Christmas party if you had nothing to hide? So I guess some people would, some people wouldn't, because they just view that as an invasion of privacy. But would you have the door open a crack, or would you at least open the door all the way to let the officer see, oh, look, there's nobody being killed here. This is a regular Christmas party. I don't know. And would you be shady in insisting that this was a mistake instead of saying, someone called the police? That's strange. Hold on a second, officer. Let's go make sure. I'll go check to make sure everything's all right. It's just, again, we don't know how it played out. Maybe it did play out that way. But these again, that would have to be corroborated. So the people that are vehemently claiming this is all coincidental, if there was no murder that happened at the house, or, for example, if this occurred maybe at a different house, at a different party, that would be easier to write off as a coincidence. But to just write off everything as coincidence all the time, that's really bizarre. You're not going to solve a lot of crimes that way. Other people, of course, believe maybe one of the kids at the party dialed 911 as a prank and they didn't want to get them in trouble, but then they would have had to know that for sure. So really, the crux of the issue here is Susan Stein's behavior, which many people point to as bizarre in other instances, not just this one. So that's something we need to look at as well. So the guest list from this party was supposedly never released. And it's curious, obviously innocent people who had nothing to do with anything, why would they have their name out in the public, of course? But it would be interesting to know that the people that were already named, if they would be corroborated, I guess, legitimately. So, people have compiled their own theoretical guest list based on people already named in books. So this isn't exposing anybody who hasn't already been named. So we have John and Patsy Ramsey, of course. Burke and Jonbenet were at the party. Don Powell, which is Patsy's father. Fleet and Priscilla White, and their daughter and son. Their daughter was 5 or 6, their son was 7 or 8. Burke was 9, Jonbenet was 6. Priscilla's parents were also there. Priscilla's sister, I don't know how they have this all this information. So Priscilla's sister's boyfriend was there, but her sister was not. And then apparently, I don't know, people visiting the Whites from California. Priscilla's niece's husband was there without his wife, also visiting the Whites from California. There seems to be a number of people who were there without their spouse. Is that curious? I don't know. John and Barbara Fernie, and then their son, who was 10, and their daughter was 14 or 15. There was also another friend of the Fernies, a 9-year-old boy. I don't know how they scavenged this information. Was he there without his parents, or he's visiting the Fernies? And then, of course, Glenn and Susan Stein and their son, who was also 9. So there's quite a few boys there that are Burke's age. Susan Stein's mother, Glenn Stein's mother, Larry and Pinky Barber and their 2 daughters, who were 6 and 8, Joe and Betty Barnhill, and the Barnhill's boarder, Glenn Meyer, who was not invited. And we will be getting in to Glenn Meyer, the mysterious boarder at the Barnhills. So the Barnhills are pretty curious. So the Barnhills' basement is where they kept Jonbenet's Christmas bike hidden. And they also were the ones that babysat Jonbenet's dog, Jacques. Now, who again was not there the night in question of her murder, coincidentally or not. And they also were the ones that were renting their basement to one Glenn Meyer. Now, they were quite old, so it's supposedly Joe Barnhill was 77 years old. And so they kept Jonbenet's silver Christmas bicycle in their basement until Christmas Eve, 9 p.m. And also they took care of Jonbenet's dog, Jacques, supposedly multiple times. Now, another curiosity. Actually, there's quite a few curiosities. I mean, there's mind shocks across the board here. This might actually end up being the most mind-shocking episode. So Barnhill was the one who said he saw John Andrew Ramsey approaching the Ramsey home on the evening of Christmas. So he's referenced often as just the neighbor who saw John Andrew. this is a guy supposedly familiar with John Andrew. This is not some neighbor who didn't know the family. So the other things that were bizarre is that on Christmas, so the bicycle was given basically to Jonbenet Christmas Eve, 9 p.m. On Christmas Day, Barnhill didn't see Jonbenet on the bike. He saw Burke on his bike. So what that means, I don't know. Was Burke jealous of her new bike? I don't know. So other issues is that Barnhill's hands were basically crippled, so he was not able to provide a handwriting sample. He is able to sign for personal and medical records, so he can scribble his signature, but apparently he can't actually write out long notes or anything of that nature. So that's curious. So their alibi that night is that he watched TV with his wife, Betty Ruth Barnhill, and the boarder, Glenn Meyer. Then went to sleep, okay? And they slept through the night, supposedly. But earlier in the evening, he saw John Andrew Ramsey approach the Ramsey home. Okay, so his wife, Betty Ruth Barnhill, she had Alzheimer's, and Patsy said she checked on the Barnhills every 2 or 3 days. And she thinks she told Betty Christmas Day afternoon that they were going to the Whites' dinner that night. So Patsy's the one who doesn't remember, even though Betty's the one with Alzheimer's. Okay. Betty gave Patsy literature on divine healing after Betty was cured of allergies. That's just an interesting note. And of course, she corroborated her husband's alibi that they watched TV with Glenn Meyer, then went to sleep. So what Glenn Meyer did after that, again, we don't know. So these are statements from Boulder Daily Camera. 6-year-old was reported kidnapping earlier in the day. Missing girl found dead December 27th, 1996. Joe Barnhill, who lives across the street, said he stowed the Christmas bicycle John Ramsey bought for Jonbenet until Christmas Eve. Barnhill was outside the house Thursday afternoon walking Jonbenet's dog, a pet he said she received as a birthday present about 2 years prior. He described the Ramseys, John, Patricia, Jonbenet, and her older brother Burke, as a happy family. Quote, "They are such congenial people, the best neighbors," end quote, said Barnhill. Barnhill said Jonbenet's mother, called Patsy, a former Miss West Virginia, raised a well-mannered, polite daughter. Quote, "She had been working so hard to groom her and raise her for the society we live in," end quote, said Barnhill. So this is another snippet from December 28th, 1996, Boulder Daily Camera. Coroner reports Boulder girl was strangled. Neighbors said the Ramseys entertained often. They had 3 separate Christmas parties in December. People were often seen coming and going from their house. Many people may have had keys to the house, including caterers, a house cleaner, gardeners, and landscapers, said Joe Barnhill, who lives across the street and takes care of Jonbenet's dog, Jacques. Barnhill, like other neighbors, didn't remember seeing anything suspicious at the Ramsey house Christmas Day, the day before Jonbenet was murdered. "I didn't see a lot of people over there Christmas Day," said Barnhill, who had hidden until Christmas Eve the bicycle Jonbenet's father had bought his daughter. "I didn't see Jonbenet with her bike, but I did see Burke ride his bike down the lawn there." Barnhill also said he saw Jonbenet's son from a previous marriage, a student at CU, come to the house. And this is a detail that's swept under the rug as well. Supposedly, John Andrew was not in Colorado. Again, we'll probably have to dedicate a whole episode to John Andrew, but I do not believe in sweeping things under the rug. We weren't there. We don't know for sure what Barnhill saw. So, more statements from Barnhill here. The following day, December 29th, 1996, Boulder camera, details still elusive in slang. Meanwhile, neighbors said a close family friend and John Ramsey, the girl's father, discovered the body of the aspiring beauty queen Thursday afternoon in the home's basement. They found her in a hidden area down there, so whoever killed her had to be somebody that knew the house, said Joe Barnhill, who lives across the street from the Ramseys and cares for Jonbenet's dog. I'm sure people are more frightened now, and I feel more vulnerable, Barnhill said. We feel that this has been a very secure and quiet neighborhood, and that's why it's such a shock. So, more interesting details here. On January 1st, 1997, Denver Post. After giving numerous interviews to the media, neighbor Barnhill yesterday declined to speak with reporters, saying the Boulder police had asked him to stop giving interviews. Other neighbors said they hadn't been told not to give interviews, but declined to do so. Were they told to say they hadn't been told? I know they're interested in keeping it quiet until all the information comes out, said one woman who wouldn't give her name. Some of the things that leaked out weren't from the police. We, as neighbors, really prefer to respect the dignity and privacy of the Ramseys, said another neighbor. This is a horrible situation. Okay, some other curiosities here. This is the June 1998 interrogation of John Ramsey by Lou Smith and Mike Kane. So he's asking him who was over. Ramsey said, yeah, the Fernies, John and Barbara Fernie, Priscilla and Fleet White, and of course their children, both the Fernies' children, I think, were there. Priscilla's sister and boyfriend, who's this fella, I don't remember what his name is, from California, was there. I can look at the picture and remember some people who were there. Say Don Powell, Patsy's father. I think that's Glenn Stein, Susan and Glenn Stein. There's Priscilla there. I think that's Priscilla's mother. Her father, I think, was there. That's Betty Barnhill, I believe, from across the street. Wait, he doesn't know what his neighbor looks like? Wait, what? The Barnhills, somebody came looking for the Barnhills later in the evening. Knocked on the door. I let him in. He said he was looking for Joe and Betty. Was worried about them. I said, well, they're in the next room, and we invited him in and we made him feel at home. I think we learned later that he was a tenant they had living in the basement, but he was there for a while. So they let this guy who wasn't officially invited to the party, into the party. He's saying he's worried about his neighbors who are going to a Christmas party that they were invited to right across the street. Why would he be worried about them? Does anybody else find that strange? Lou Smith says, what do you know about him? John Ramsey says, nothing. I had no idea they even had a tenant over there. That's the first time I had ever seen him. I thought he was just a guest from out of town. Do you know his name? Lou Smith asked. John Ramsey says, oh, I did, after the facts. I don't know if I'd recognize it if you even told me. Lou Smith says, Glenn Meyer? John Ramsey says, Glenn Meyer, yes. That's the only time I had ever seen him. At the time, I didn't know who he was. I just thought he was a guest. Lou Smith says, but didn't you board your dog over at the Barnhills? John Ramsey says, we did. They became attached to him. We had them keep him once or twice, and they really loved him. They lost their dog, and he died, so they really became attached to Jacques, and it was kind of a good setup because they took care of him, and the kids could play with him. So it was, for us, it was, as parents, it was kind of neat. Lou Smith asks, so did the kids go over there quite often? John Ramsey says, yeah. It was not uncommon for them to go over there, or Jacques would come over. He'd stay with us sometimes, and he became increasingly their dog because they were just so attached to it. And we thought it was kind of nice because they were older. It was a nice companionship for them. It was kind of neat for us because the kids could still have a dog, and we didn't have to deal with a dog 24 hours a day. So more and more as time went on, he stayed more at the Barnhills than he did at our house. Lou Smith asks, were the kids developing a relationship with this fella, Glenn Myers, do you think, or has that ever been discussed? John Ramsey says, it's never been discussed. I don't know, to my knowledge anyway. As I say, I didn't even know he lived there. They had an apartment in the basement. Lou Smith asks, had you yourself ever been to the Barnhills? John Ramsey says, yeah, we went over for dinner once, I'd think. We'd step in and check on them and take him things to eat sometimes. And I think Betty or Joe was sick for a while and Patsy would take them a thing of food and check on them. They were good neighbors. Lou Smith says, okay, did you go to the Barnhills to pick up a bike? John Ramsey says, yeah, Christmas Eve. We'd given Jonbenet a bike, we got Patsy a bike. We were giving Burke a bike, but not that year. Anyway, there was a bike that we put in the basement and I had gone over after the kids went to bed to go get it to put it under the tree. And Joe went down to the garage and went to get it and brought it up. I offered to go get it and he said no, he'd go get it himself. I don't know where it specifically was, whether it was actually in his garage or his basement. Lou Smith says, you know, I've looked at a lot of pictures in regards to this particular case and I can't remember seeing any bikes. What happened to the bikes? Ramsey said, well, they were in the garage, I guess. Jonbenet rode her bike for a moment outside before we went to the Whites, just around the patio. I'm sure that went back in the garage. Patsy's bike, I don't know. It could have gone in the garage. I don't remember. Lou Smith says, have you seen it since Patsy's bike? John Ramsey says, yeah, we have it. Lou Smith asks who took it. John Ramsey says, no, we gave Jonbenet's bike. We gave away. Patsy's bike, we haven't. Okay, so very, very interesting. They have a boarder, a tenant, boarder, whatever you want to call them, across the street from the Ramseys, who the Ramseys don't know about, but their kids go over to play at the house with the dog quite often, or not uncommon, as he would say. Not uncommon means common, right? So they'd been over there a number of times, an unknown number of times. How had they encountered or interacted with Glenn Meyer? And why was Glenn Meyer randomly worried about them when they were right across the street at a Christmas party? Does anybody else find this strange? I don't know. This seems strange. Okay, so some more tidbits here. This is the Lawrence Schiller book, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. Page 66. Meanwhile, in Boulder, detectives Steve Thomas and Ron Gosage interviewed the Ramseys' neighbors, Joe Barnhill, 77, and his wife, Betty, who lived across the street. The Barnhills had a key to the Ramseys' home. Since they were taking care of Jonbenet's dog, Jacques, the detectives learned that the Barnhills had a boarder, Glenn Meyer, who lived in their basement. So, if they had their keys simply by the door or wherever keys are, or if Glenn Meyer saw where their keys were, where they kept their keys, if he had been boarding with them for whatever period of time, it is plausible that Glenn Meyer could have also had access to a key to the Ramseys' home, so we could add him to the list. Joe and Betty Barnhill had been guests at the Ramseys' Christmas party on December 23rd and had chatted with Patsy's father, Don Paw, a retired engineer. Paw had worked as his son-in-law's first director of human resources at Access Graphics and still worked most of the time for John in Boulder, while Nedra, his wife, ran John's Atlanta office. Paw told the Barnhills he had a new position at Access Manager of Inventory Tracking. The firm's market niche was the Lincoln and Cadillac part of the industry, he said proudly. Barnhill confirmed to police that at about 9 p.m., On December 24th, John Ramsey had come to their house to pick up Jonbenet's bicycle, a Christmas gift. The Barnhills said they were home the night Jonbenet was killed. The police asked Joe for a handwriting sample, but his palsy made it impossible for him to give one. A week later, he signed a waiver and his doctor confirmed Barnhill's illness to the police. The detectives then interviewed the boarder, Glenn Meyer. He said that he had been at home on Christmas night and had watched television in the den with the Barnhills until 9 p.m. He then went downstairs to his basement room and spent the rest of the evening nursing a stomach flu. Meyer was also at the Ramseys' Christmas party, but he said he hadn't been introduced to Patsy or Jonbenet. Do you mind taking a lie detector test? Detective Thomas asked him. Meyer didn't, and on January 1st at 5:30 p.m., a polygraph test was administered. Most of the questions were about the Ramseys, and the examiner told him he had answered the questions truthfully. A few weeks later, Detective Ramsey asked Meyer for several handwriting samples and took his fingerprints. Skipping over to page 179, on December 26th, John Ramsey had told the police there weren't any keys hidden under rocks in the yard and that only John Andrew, Nedra, and Linda had extra keys. But 3 weeks later, on January 21st, Patsy's attorney told the police that the Whites, the Fernies, and Joe Barnhill also had keys. In April 1997, Ellis Armistead, an investigator hired by the Ramseys, would tell the police that there were 20 more extra keys outstanding. In the end, however, the detectives could only find 9 people who said they had keys. 6 of the keys were returned, 3 were missing, and then, of course, supposedly the Ramseys had never even changed the locks after moving into the Boulder home, which would mean that there are many, many other sets of keys out there, as well as anybody who made copies. Okay, so let's dissect this. So, conveniently, Glenn Meyer is saying he had the stomach flu conveniently on Christmas night. He conveniently has the stomach flu. Is that someone trying to say he couldn't have been a killer because he was incapacitated with the stomach flu? If he didn't have a stomach flu, would he say he had one even if he's innocent to make it look like he couldn't have done it? I don't know. That's a weird detail. And then, of course, why is he randomly going to the Ramseys for the Christmas? Or is he just a lonely guy that didn't get invited to a Christmas party? So he just sauntered on over, pretending to be concerned about the Barnhills, just to socialize? I don't know. It's weird. So, in Death of Innocence, written by John and Patsy Ramsey, March 18, 2000, page 95 states, on December 23rd, 31 people arrived for the party. The Whites, the Barnhills, the Fernies, the Steins, and the Barbers. And all their children, plus their assorted house guests. Later that evening, Glenn Meyer, a single man who rented a room in Joe and Betty Barnhill's basement, showed up looking for them. I invited him in because the Barnhills were good neighbors. Our family dog, Jacques, lived part-time at their house. So why is Glenn Meyer looking for them at this Christmas party? Did they just forget to tell him they went to a party and he's just going to all the neighbors looking for them randomly? I don't know. I mean, it seems like these details would be easy to nail down, but I don't know. Something seems off about the stomach flu. He just conveniently has a stomach flu on the night that Jonbenet Ramsey is murdered. I mean, I don't know. Is that a coincidence? I don't know. It's weird. So let's look at Steve Thomas's book, Jonbenet Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation, which was released in 2000. It's kind of strange here. Page 70, Joe and Betty Barnhill, the elderly neighbors so trusted by the Ramseys that Jonbenet's silver Christmas bicycle had been hidden with them, would also eventually be pointed to as possible murder suspects by the Ramseys. Now, I don't know where they did this because I haven't seen that. From the moment I saw them, I knew it was ridiculous that they should be considered and that we should be spending time investigating them. Joe, a silver-haired man in his 70s, and late 70s at that, was taking care of his wife who had Alzheimer's, and Joe was crippled so badly with palsy himself that he needed both hands to sign a shaky signature. allowing us to obtain their personal medical records. He never asked for a lawyer and shook our hands as we left, saying, "I'm confident that you will solve it." That sort of cooperation was rare, and we certainly weren't getting it from the Ramseys. We soon cleared the Barnhills. The Barnhills rented out a basement room to Glenn Meyer, who would be pointed out by Ramsey investigators as a possible suspect because he carried a heavy load of debt. So that's another interesting thing there. Now, so this guy is in debt. This guy is randomly going to the Ramsey Christmas party. This guy is randomly stating that he had a stomach flu the particular night that Jonbenet Ramsey was murdered. Now, if he was at the party, all of a sudden, we have the possibility that he's talking and mingling and overhearing conversations about John Ramsey's Christmas bonus, possibly. I wonder how many people knew about the Christmas bonus, because it seems, again, with this Powell character, this family, this is in the family business, so they're discussing business and work amongst each other. What did Glenn Meyer overhear, or possibly overhear? Interesting. And he has a heavy load of debt, supposedly. So, again, this is from page 71 here. Meyer was an even more unlikely suspect than the Barnhills, since his own son had been murdered in Boston. Now, that is tragic. He could not have been more cooperative with us. After an interview, giving writing and hair samples and passing a polygraph, he was also cleared. Meyer and the Barnhills also alibied each other, having watched television together on Christmas night and all going to bed early, Meyer with a case of the flu. And I wonder if the Barnhills definitively corroborated that he did indeed have the flu. Another reason to interview the Barnhills, however, was that Joe had told the police he had seen Jonbenet's older half-brother, John Andrew, in Boulder on the evening of December 25th. John Andrew claimed to have been in Atlanta at the time. During the interview, Barnhill sheepishly told us he had made a mistake and apologized, saying that he probably would not even recognize the young man in a crowd. That went a long way toward firming up John Andrew's alibi. Okay, so automatically there, I don't know. This book is by Steve Thomas. Some people say he's extremely biased. Now, this guy seems like he's wanting to be helpful. Did he simply assume he made a mistake? But initially, early on, he seemed to be incredibly sure of himself. Now, all of a sudden, he's saying he simply made a mistake? That something seems off with that situation. The Barnhills also had a key to the Ramsey home, something we had not known. The Ramseys initially said that the only outsiders with keys were two relatives and the housekeeper. So that does not sound to me like they were implicating the Barnhills as suspects, because otherwise they would say, oh yeah, our neighbors across the street, they have keys as well. So again, this does seem like quite a biased book. Since then, we had turned up one with the former nanny, Suzanne Savage, and now another with the Barnhills. We didn't know how many keys existed, and the number would continue to grow. Jacques, the white Bichon Frise that belonged to Jonbenet and was temporarily in the care of the Barnhills, jumped into my lap while we all watched the 5 o'clock news about the funeral in Atlanta. That seems like a weird detail to add to your book. Okay, so we're going to get more into MINDSHOCK territory now with the Barnhills. So this is email, so these are email corroborations or forum posts here. So someone we haven't really talked about is Rita Johnson, who an individual claimed was friend/acquaintance of Patsy Ramsey, that she bumped into a store in Atlanta and apparently spent some time with her at a garden party. And this is a story that has been online, the veracity of which I don't know has ever been definitively verified. But apparently she was involved with individuals who were known to Patsy and who have been commenting online on message boards. Again, I don't know if this has ever been definitively verified, but these are all similar names in the circling here. Her frequent, this was posted November 21st, 2003, by Rita Johnson. Her frequent visits across the street to Joe Barnhill and his wife, taking them to dinner because she was afraid they would have none. This was a quote by Rain Song on Crime News. And Rita Johnson writes here, I just want to set the record straight about Patsy, John, and the Barnhills. From the day of Jonbenet's murder, neither John nor Patsy contacted the Barnhills, even though Jacques was supposedly Jonbenet's dog. Joe Barnhill and I have spoken on numerous occasions, and he very sadly said he has never been contacted by the family and doesn't know why. The only one that contacted him was one of their investigators telling him to, quote, be quiet and never talk about what he saw the morning of the murder, end quote. He said, quote, they told me I was mistaken, end quote. I found that to be very odd. Never once was he contacted when his wife was deathly ill and ultimately died very near the time that Nedra died. And finally, when little Jacques died, he asked me to tell the Ramseys, and I emailed them, but nobody called him then either. He doesn't understand why. Even more so since his stepdaughter, Diane Aldridge, helped out the Ramseys by putting together the Diane Sawyer special. She is the producer for the show. There's no, whoa, is that another coincidence? What? She's the producer. It just goes to show that they seemingly forgot some of those that helped them out in the very early days following Jonbenet's death. It's strange that Patsy would have constantly gone over to their house to make sure they ate and checked on them, yet never spoken to them since the murder. Now, some people believe Rita Johnson is just an unhinged loony who inserted herself in the case and planned to write a book that apparently was never published, but other people have found that she did in fact speak to a lot of these people, or at least attempted to. And some of these statements are quite curious. If Diane Aldridge really was the Barnhill's stepdaughter, and she set up the Diane Sawyer special, I mean, that is weird. It's also a little weird if this was a true claim here by Rita Johnson regarding that they were told never to talk about what they saw the morning of the murder. The morning? What does that mean? Rita Johnson also posted this November 27th, 2003. So someone asked a question about Joe Barnhill's son who lived in Colorado. She said something about his DNA not being ruled out. That's just not true. She also mentioned that he didn't visit his father on Christmas and thought that was strange. It's not strange. They are estranged and have been for a long time. Barnhill was remarried and was closer to his stepchildren than he is with his own kids. He has a daughter that he hasn't spoken to in years. He says it's their doing, not his. What I did find disturbing about this post is that this individual never bothered to answer her. She should or would have known all this with as much as she has researched about the case. Barnhill was one of the first ones I checked into and later became friends with him. Since his wife died near Nedra's death, he and I have spoken quite often, and he went into some detail about his thoughts about the events surrounding that fateful Christmas day. Barnhill's son was traveling that day and wasn't even in Colorado, though his DNA was checked and that of his son and the guy who was living in the basement at the time. Barnhill told me that kids, teenage kids, and others right on the street weren't tested. He said the guy that lived right next door, single at the time, wasn't even checked. It seems the DNA checking was selected. But no, Joe Barnhill's son's DNA was checked and he was released from suspicion. But then again, remember I was point blank told by Tom Bennett that no one has been 100% released from suspicion. This doesn't seem fair to others that have been labeled suspect from the start, does it? I'm always bothered when someone isn't answered about these types of issues because it adds to the confusion. Okay, and then of course we do know that the DNA evidence was quite suspicious. We have the theory put forth that this was a factory worker regarding Jonbenet's DNA, regarding the DNA found on Jonbenet's underwear, but supposedly there's also DNA under her fingernails. So yeah, there's a lot of issues there. But going back to the Christmas party list, so we have all these individuals, and then of course Linda Hoffman Powell and her daughter Ariana, who was 12, and then Bill and Janet McReynolds. And this was the Santa Claus, Bill McReynolds. And the long list of coincidences with the McReynolds are, they're just too much to go over on this episode. I'll have to do a dedicated episode on them. But apparently there were at least 5 children there, ages 6 to 8, 4 girls, 1 boy. So the 2 Barbers, 2 Whites, and Jonbenet. There were 4 boys, aged 9 to 10, Stein, Ramsey, Fernie, and Fernie's friends. And there were 2 older girls, Furman and Hoffman Powell. So apparently there were 34 people at the party, although John Ramsey apparently said there were 31. Okay. The other thing that's an issue, if Linda Hoffman Powell was... There were issues between... Okay, yeah, I won't get into those issues there. I'll have to do a dedicated episode on Powell. But regarding Glenn Meyer, we are going back to Glenn Meyer. So February 2018, we have this bombshell interview. And this was reported various news sources, including RadarOnline.com. This is from their article, February 6, 2018. My husband killed Jonbenet, chilling claims and shocking new evidence in cold case. Ex-wife tells all on creep across the street, Glenn Meyer. My husband killed Jonbenet Ramsey. That's the bombshell confession of the widow of an Indiana man obsessed with the child pageant queen whose murder has remained America's greatest unsolved mystery until now. In a jaw-dropping, world-exclusive investigation provided to RadarOnline.com, the National Enquirer traveled to 6 states, interviewed dozens of sources, worked alongside detectives, and uncovered new witnesses to crack the cold case after 21 years. And of course, the National Enquirer is a dubious source to say the least, but let's not fall for genetic logical fallacies. They do get stuff correct as well, not to mention if these theories open the door to something that is the real truth, they are still worth investigating, particularly if evidence uncovered has some legitimacy, even if it doesn't match their own headlines. If they discovered something that even possibly rules somebody else out, that could still possibly be helpful. Courageous Charlotte Hay, 85, broke her silence for the first time to finger her unhinged ex-husband, Glenn Meyer, as Jonbenet's murderer. I believe my husband killed Jonbenet. I knew he was capable of it, Charlotte told the Enquirer exclusively. When I asked him if he murdered her, he would just smile at me. He wouldn't deny it. Now again, if this is a loony, unhinged individual, that doesn't mean he killed anybody, but again, insane people do not behave the way normal people behave. So that obviously that's not evidence in any way. Charlotte married Meyer in 1960, but left him in 1966. They were on and off in the decades that followed and reconnected before the murder. They divorced in 2002. At the time of the murder, Meyer was secretly living in the basement of a home across the street from the Ramseys in Boulder, Colorado, and later built a shrine to the slain child using pictures and newspaper clippings, sources said. His handwriting matched the ransom note found in the Ramsey home, and cops considered him a suspect. Now, I'm just going to touch on a quick aside right here. Some people theorize, I don't know if we went over this on MINDSHOCK, we try to go over everything, that the notepad was actually stolen from the Ramsey home and that the ransom note could have been written at a different time than theorized, possibly a day or two prior. Okay, continuing here. In emails to the Inquirer, Jonbenet's father, John Ramsey, told how Meyer turned up at his house uninvited when the family hosted a party on December 23rd, 1996, 2 days before her murder. Yes, Glenn Meyer was of interest at some point, John told the Inquirer via email on January 15th. I do recall him coming to our door the night of our family Christmas party, which was just before Christmas. I don't remember why. Up to that point, we did not know he was living across the street in the basement. A new witness made a deathbed confession that she saw Meyer on the Ramsey property on the night of Jonbenet's murder. So again, we don't know if this is true or not, but it's mind-shocking nonetheless. Meyer battled mental illness, was drowning in debt at the time of the murder, and had a history of violence. Court documents obtained by the Inquirer show Meyer was arrested for a 1991 assault in a domestic violence case and was ordered to attend anger counseling courses. In August 95, he was sued for owing more than $24,000 and subpoenaed to appear in Boulder County Court in October 96, 2 months before the murder. So I guess these are not rumors of him being in debt. The creep also had a vicious streak, especially towards young girls. He was violent with my little girl. She was in 4th grade, and he gave her such a horrible spanking, Charlotte told the Inquirer. I told him to stop, but he wouldn't. A lot of times he was cruel to my kids. They were afraid of him. I was scared of him. The beast even walloped her 1-year-old granddaughter while she was sitting in the high chair. The scary thing is, Meyer had a history of abusive and deranged behavior. Yet somehow he ends up living in the basement of Jonbenet's elderly babysitters, Joe and Betty Barnhill. A source says it was easy access. Jonbenet was 6 years old when she was sexually violated and strangled inside her family's ritzy home. Cops suspect the killer broke a basement window, crept into the house, slipped up to the bedroom where Jonbenet was sleeping, and knocked her out with a stun gun. She was carried to the basement, bound, silenced with duct tape, molested, strangled with a garrote, and smashed in the head with a baseball bat. Investigators linked Meyer to the murder through the bizarre 3-page ransom note found before Jonbenet's body was discovered in the basement. A demand of $118,000 was written on a legal pad found in the house and signed SBTC. John told the Inquirer that Lou Smith, a former detective hired to investigate the crime, zeroed in on Meyer due to the ransom note and evidence found in the loner's basement apartment at the Barnhill home. Lou Smith told me there was a photo of a Navy Avenger aircraft in the basement with SBTC lettering on it, which seemed beyond coincidental, John wrote. Wow, okay, if that's true, that is quite mind-shocking, is it not? Okay, we're gonna go into the SBTC, and this is gonna be mind-shocking because the amount of coincidences are just, they're just mind-shocking. There's no way to explain it. So some people believed this is just simply means saved by the cross. This is a religious family, so that is a common attribute. And of course, the other possibility, people believe it's Subic Bay Training Center. And Subic Bay Training Center is, of course, where John Ramsey's naval training took place in the Philippines. And that's curious because here's the thing. If Patsy Ramsey wrote the note or someone else wrote it and they just made up some random letters for an acronym to throw people off, is it curious that the coincidence stack we're about to go through regarding SBTC, that there's that many possibilities? Because if you're going to pull 4 random letters let's look at the statistical chance that these 4 random letters are going to happen to relate to so many individuals. Now pick another 4 random and see if you can make them relate to the same individuals. Because again, let's use controls. Let's be scientific. For the coincidence theorists that just immediately write it off, they mean nothing, do not investigate, do not waste time. Think of another 4 random letters and see if you can match them to anything at all. Because if you can't, but you can match SBTC to a whole bunch of things, what does that mean? So again, John Ramsey received his naval training in the Philippines at Subic Bay Training Center. Now, supposedly it wasn't actually known as Subic Bay Training Center. That was John Ramsey's statement regarding that in interviews. So he didn't think of it. However, I mean, I don't know. If your daughter was murdered, are you going to rack absolutely everything? Because he dug up references to some Star Trek episodes or movies. Like, he really found everything you could find about SBTC, but he couldn't match that up to Subic Bay. I mean, how many things are SB relating to his specific life? I don't know. Some people find that weird. However, apparently John Ramsey did have a photograph in his house. So from Perfect Town, Perfect Murder, Linda Wilcox, this quote attributed to Linda Wilcox. I don't remember if I told them about the large photograph John had of an aircraft carrier. On the bottom of the picture in fancy writing were the words Subic Bay Training Center. The script was faint because it blended in with the water, so the words were hard to read. It used to hang behind his desk in the bedroom. The base was closed and renamed in 1992. It is now the Subic Bay Freeport Zone. So another coincidence is, of course, Subic Bay in the Philippines was actually, this was exposed later. This was exposed actually as early as the late 80s, that child prostitution was actually rampant there. So if John Ramsey had something to do with that, was he involved in that, and did he have connections after the fact and continue to be involved in that? And that's where it gets crazy. Someone else actually dug up an article from March 5th, 1993 in the LA Times. Suit asks Navy to aid children left in the Philippines. Courts the class action filing charges that the Amerasian youngsters are owed financial help because they are a product of a U.S. policy for fostering prostitution. And these are known as throwaway children. Here's an excerpt here. When the Navy pulled out of Subic Bay in November, after nearly 50 years of operations there, we agreed to clean up the toxic waste we left behind, but made no provisions for the throwaway children fathered by American sailors, Kotsche said, a noted Bay Area attorney who volunteered to prepare the suit after reading about the children's plight. So we have Subic Bay Training Center, we have Subic Bay throwaway children. Again, this is weird. This is weird. Now, are we ready to add another point to the coincidence stack? John Mark Carr. Now, he wrote in someone's high school yearbook, I shall be the conqueror. SBTC, shall be the conqueror. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Was this a catchphrase that he used a lot? Quite bizarre. Quite bizarre. Also, again, we have, not to jump around a lot, we are jumping around a little bit. So we have John Ramsey stating that Lou Smith told him there was a photo of a Navy Avenger aircraft in the basement with SBTC lettering on it, which seemed beyond coincidental. So that's beyond coincidental, but the photo in John Ramsey's house that has SBTC on it from his naval days. That's not coincidental. So this is why people think that John Ramsey had something to do with it. And if this angle of child prostitution is explored further in Subic Bay in the Philippines, where John Ramsey was stationed, if John Ramsey was involved, because other military personnel were involved, is it possible John Ramsey was involved? And the throwaway children, which just happens to be the catchphrase used there, that just happens to be the phrase. That's quite bizarre. Quite bizarre. Now let's go down this rabbit hole even further. Because let's say if Patsy Ramsey just pulled that out of nowhere and made it up, what are the chances that it matches all these things? And we're about to get even crazier. Another quick aside was supposedly there was a Southwestern Bell Telephone Company phone book that was by the ransom note or somewhere in the vicinity of the ransom note. I don't know if that's been verified. Would you randomly use that I don't know. Southwestern Bell Telephone Company, SBTC. But going back to John Mark Carr. So let's see, how many other individuals signed yearbooks in all caps, I shall be the conqueror? Although, to be fair, should that be ISBTC? But there was an old friend of Carr's who apparently found that from their high school yearbook. So that would have been a good amount of years prior. But even if we disregard that, the other thing that's weird with John Mark Carr, apparently he was in Atlanta at the time of the murder. That's weird. Atlanta, the other home of the Ramseys. You can't make this stuff up. Out of all the cities that John Mark Carr could be in, he happened to be Atlanta, and apparently he used to like the SBTC I shall be the conqueror signature, and he used it in the past. Supposedly it was some kind of local vernacular in Atlanta so it was like a common phrase, I shall be the conqueror. I guess all cities and time periods have their catchphrases, of course. Some people said he used another signature, live in multiple peace. I shall be the conqueror, and also live in multiple peace. He used that signature. All right, now that's a couple of coincidences. Are we going to stack it even higher? Because Michael Helgoth, another person of interest, another bizarre individuals, apparently he had a hat that had SBTC on it. I mean, it's kind of bizarre. It's kind of bizarre. And when Michael Helgoth, who supposedly died of suicide, and he had a baseball hat that said SBTC on it that was near his body. So, again, this is just something that's really, really bizarre. The coincidence stack is quite high. But, again, let's switch out. We can switch out the SBTC for 4 other letters, and let's see if it matches anything. Because what are the chances that all these things could match? And I actually just found yet another coincidence to add to the stack. So Robert Chris Wolf, a Boulder journalist, filed a $50 million libel suit against the Ramseys, claiming they libeled him in their book, The Death of Innocence, and in TV interviews by claiming he was a suspect. Following the death of Jonbenet, Wolf's girlfriend called police to say he was acting suspiciously and was not home during the time of the killing. Boulder police investigated Wolf and said they found no evidence to link him to the crime, according to a press report. In March 2003, U.S. District Court Judge Julie Carnes of Atlanta dismissed Wolf's libel suit against the Ramseys, in which his lawyer tried to prove Patsy Ramsey was responsible for Jonbenet's death. Carnes said the child's murder is more consistent with a theory that an intruder murdered Jonbenet than it was with a theory that Mrs. Ramsey did. Okay, but regarding Chris Wolf, There was supposedly a recreation of the original ransom note, and the handwriting is quite similar. It's quite similar, and the recreated document was compiled from the journal entries of an individual who we believe should be further investigated for the murder of Jonbenet Ramsey. Handwriting expert Thomas Grogan of Forensic Document Laboratory Incorporated analyzed these two documents and confirmed in a court-ready report that these were in fact created by the same hand. And so this is quite interesting because this Chris Wolf individual is touted as a possible author, although I don't know if that's been confirmed from this screenshot here. Now, are we ready to get mind shocked? Because Chris Wolf supposedly had a shirt or sweatshirt with what initials on it? Drumroll, please. The coincidence stack is going through the roof. SBTC, Santa Barbara Training Center. Now, I don't know what that refers to, but what are the chances that a guy, there's a ransom note suspiciously compiled from possibly Chris Wolf's journals that matches the ransom note, and the guy had a sweatshirt with SBTC on it. Of course, all of this is alleged, but if it's true, this is quite bizarre. And then, of course, he even had a lawsuit against the Ramseys, and his ex-girlfriend allegedly was the one that copy and pasted this ransom note. And this is bizarre. Now, I'm sure a lot of people, well, actually, I don't know. How many people were unaccounted for Christmas night? Because his girlfriend is saying he was unaccounted for, acting strangely around that time period when he came home after he was unaccounted for. I don't know what to make of this. So Chris Wolf is not exactly a random nobody. So let's get this coincidence stack going, because it's about to go through the roof even higher, and we're just getting started. So he had an SBTC sweatshirt. And this individual, again, not a random nobody. He has a master's degree in journalism. He worked as a reporter for Colorado Daily and Colorado County Business Reports. Does anybody want to take a guess where Cheryl McGraw worked, who Chris Wolf interviewed? Drum roll, please. And the coincidence stack goes higher. Access Graphics. I mean, you cannot make up these degrees of separation. Is this all coincidental? It's just really, really bizarre. Now, Wolf has stated that he never heard of Jonbenet Ramsey before the murder, and why would he necessarily, right? Just because he's interviewing the secretary of Access Graphics, Jonbenet Ramsey's father's company, that doesn't mean he would know of Jonbenet Ramsey. So if everybody's got their tinfoil hat on, we will move on to Susanna Chase. Now, Shapiro wrote about Wolf as a suspect in spring 1997. He also convinced him to give police a handwriting and DNA sample. He also contacted a former roommate of Chris Wolf's. So Jeff Shapiro, in December 2001, Ghost of Christmas Past, he wrote that he met with Wolf in the fall of 97. He worked as a mountain climbing instructor for Outward Bound, had a history of working as a male stripper. He had a 1992 indecent exposure charge, which he pleaded guilty to. Dilson said Wolf owned mountain climbing boots, but they were Danners, not high-tech boots. Expressed hostility against John Ramsey and Access Graphics specifically. Shapiro did convince Wolf to cooperate by giving DNA to the authorities. So, okay. I tried calling Wolf back at his old phone number by accident and spoke to his roommate. So Ben Shapiro is calling Wolf's old number and spoke to his roommate. To my surprise, told me that although Wolf had never spoken about Jonbenet Ramsey, he had made numerous comments about a romantic interest he had developed in Susanna Chase shortly before she was murdered. Chase was a University of Colorado student murdered on a sidewalk near Liquor Mart on December 21st, 1997, almost 1 year after Jonbenet Ramsey's murder. Much like the Ramsey case, her murder remains unsolved with no suspect in custody. Like Jonbenet, Chase was struck in the head with an unknown object. I had almost fallen off my chair by the time the roommate explained to me that Wolf had been courting Chase after meeting her at Wild Oats, where she worked as a cashier, Shapiro says. The roommate claimed that Chase had agreed to go out with Wolf as a friend since she already had a boyfriend. Once the murder occurred, the roommate told me Wolf expressed deep sadness and frustration over it. Okay, all right, so what do we have in the coincidence pile regarding Wolf? We have his ex-girlfriend saying he was unaccounted for at the time and was acting strangely afterwards. We have allegedly her compiling letters from his journals that eerily match the ransom note. He has a sweatshirt with SBTC on it. Of course, this is all alleged, but Shapiro has published these articles relating the information I just said about Susanna Chase, who happened to be murdered by someone who went out with her, and she had told him she had a boyfriend. Again, going back to FBI statistics, females are most likely to be murdered females are most likely to have been killed by whom? Ex-boyfriend or love interest or stalker or someone known to them, not a stranger. So we have this Chris Wolf character who just happens to be involved in this coincidence act, and he's also a journalist who interviewed the secretary for Access Graphics, John Ramsey's company. I mean, there's so many coincidences to keep track of. It's just so difficult. It's so difficult. So the Ramsey case was stagnant at the time, so the Globe had sent Shapiro to Los Angeles to follow celebrities and invade their private lives. From LA, Shapiro called Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner and told him what he just learned from Wolf's old roommate. 1 hour later, Detective Kerry Yamaguchi called and told me to fly back to Boulder so he could interview me about this, Shapiro says. Yamaguchi hinted to me only one thing, that Wolf's girlfriend, who had accused him of the Ramsey murder, had also accused him of the Chase murder as well. Do you think that Chris Wolf is capable of killing someone? Yamaguchi asked me. I don't think so, I said. Later, in a conversation with John Ramsey, Shapiro was asked again for his assessment of Chris Wolf. John Ramsey told me he suspected that the same person who had killed Jonbenet also killed Susanna Chase. I mean, that's kind of random. John Ramsey really says a lot of random things, doesn't he? Shapiro says, Ramsey asked me my thoughts on Wolf. I think his girlfriend is very angry with him, I told him, hinting of a possible motive of revenge on her part. Eventually, Shapiro says police told him they didn't suspect Wolf in either crime, and Shapiro is convinced Wolf didn't do it, despite weird connections he calls coincidence. He's seen far stranger connections involving other suspects, such as the man with the website on how to brutally torture Barbie dolls and make sophisticated garrots like what was used to kill Jonbenet. Obviously, I'll be going over that in another episode. Susanna and Chase. Wolf says Shapiro got it partly right regarding his relationship with Susanna Chase. I knew Susanna Chase because I ate at Wild Oats almost every single day, Wolf says. I knew all the pretty girls there. I thought she was a wonderful, beautiful, intelligent young woman, but a romantic interest, I don't know about that. I never asked her out on a date. She was 18 years younger than me, and I don't go out and try to score with women who are 18 years younger than me. I don't need notches on my holster. Been there, done that a long time ago. That is quite an interesting quote from Chris Wolf. And he's basically calling the roommate a liar. So the roommate who had obviously shared many conversations with Chris Wolf. And of course, Chris Wolf wouldn't want to implicate himself or make himself look bad, so he probably would say that he doesn't need notches, even if that information is true. Again, that doesn't mean he killed either woman. I'm simply stating to not ignore FBI stats. I also say it's highly strange, highly strange that he has an SBTC sweatshirt, if that's true. And I also think it's an interesting coincidence that he's interviewing Cheryl McGraw, the secretary of Access Graphics. Then he's going on later to sue John Ramsey. Now, I mean, obviously it's not completely outside the realm of possibility. He's working as a reporter for Boulder County Business Report. So he's going to be interviewing a lot of secretaries for a lot of different businesses in Boulder. But there's a lot of businesses in Boulder. He didn't interview every single secretary for every single business. So it's bizarre. It's definitely bizarre. Now, also, just as controls, how many people's girlfriends called the police on their boyfriend, suspecting them of the Jonbenet Ramsey murder? Now, we'd have to guess that Chris Wolf's girlfriend is probably not the only one. But we also can't assume there were hundreds or thousands of people reporting their significant other because, again, if his girlfriend is lying and he really was home as he claimed, then of course that's taken care of. But has his alibi been 100% verified? Did any neighbors see that? I mean, I would think this would all be thoroughly investigated. But just regarding the SBTC, how many instances of SBTC are we going to find? And how many instances of any other acronyms are we not going to find? That's the only point there. So again, we're going all the way back around to Meyer. That was quite along the side, but I just couldn't let that go regarding John Ramsey stating that it's this major coincidence that there's a Navy Avenger aircraft in the basement with SBTC lettering on it. So what does that mean? What does that SBTC stand for? And why did John Ramsey avoid his own photograph with the I don't know. It's weird. So let's go back to this article here regarding Glenn Meyer. The explosive new evidence pointing to Meyer as Jonbenet's killer is supported by the deathbed confession of a female neighbor who claimed she saw Meyer near the Ramsey home on the night of the killing. She, the neighbor, is positive she saw Meyer approaching the house the night of the murder. Roscoe J. Clark, founder of the online group Jonbenet Investigation, told the Inquirer. People were afraid of him. He would stare at children in the neighborhood. The witness said she wanted to clear her conscience before she died. When questioned by the cops, Meyer's alibi was that he had the stomach flu the night of the murder. And again, not that he's guilty, but was he stretching the truth there? He randomly has the stomach flu of all possible nights that night. Of course, it's a possibility. It's a very, especially, let's say he gets the stomach flu often. Now, we don't know that. If he does and he has stomach issues, very possible. Also, what I didn't mention before, if he really is mentally unhinged, if he has a split personality or some other sociopathic traits, he would obviously be able to pass a lie detector test because he wouldn't be nervous about it. That doesn't necessarily exonerate him, of course. So, when questioned by cops, Meyer's alibi was that he had a stomach flu the night of the murder. He submitted blood, DNA, and hair samples and was cleared after passing a lie detector test. But police were unable to completely exonerate him from writing the ransom note, according to a source familiar with the case. Cops demanded Meyer submit handwriting samples because of the undeniable similarities with the ransom note. At the Inquirer's request, Charlotte reviewed the ransom note and said the handwriting resembled her ex-husband's, particularly the distinctive way he wrote the G and Y. Not long after Jonbenet's death, Meyer fled Boulder to Indiana, where he lived in a state-run apartment complex for elderly, homeless people. That's where Meyer, who was battling dementia, decorated his room with photos of Jonbenet and news clippings about her death. He had pictures of her, pieces of newspapers with pictures of Jonbenet pasted all over the wall of that apartment, Charlotte told the Inquirer. He was obsessed with that little dying girl. Now, here's the thing, though. Again, as a counterpoint, if this guy is mentally unhinged, if Jonbenet and Burke maybe did go to the house to play with their dog and Meyer did encounter them, whether he interacted directly with them or not, just the fact that he knew them and he saw them regularly, Jonbenet dies. If he already has a mental condition and he's just mentally unhinged, he's the type of person that might develop this kind of an obsession and build this shrine, even if he's completely innocent. So just, again, we have to weigh all of this information objectively. Meyer's nephew, Robert Meyer, 63, defended him, saying, "I don't think he would be capable of that murder." But Charlotte thinks otherwise. Before he died in July 2005, Charlotte visited her former husband in the hospital. Standing over him, she told the Inquirer her only thought was, "You deserve to die, you a-hole." Okay, interesting. And of course, again, what people believe, whether or not people believe other people are capable of murder, I mean, again, with all of these serial killers who had families that never suspected them, I mean, it's difficult to say, but does that mean a whole lot? I mean, I don't know. The other thing that's a little bizarre is, see, abusive relationships or things of that nature, if he's beating her kids and abusing her kids, why would she continue to get back together with him? Now, it's one thing if you can't escape the relationship, but it's stating here that they're on and off for years at a time, decades at a time, and then they actually remarried before the murder, but then didn't divorce until 2002. Now, I don't know the intricacies there, but if you escape with your kids and he was abusing the kids, why would you ever go back? Now, if you can't escape, obviously that's a completely different situation, but this is bizarre. Now, the other thing that's interesting here too, the motivations of an 85-year-old. I mean, she wants fame at 85, really, or is she mentally not all there as well? I don't know. Is that maybe she really believes he did it even if he didn't? Maybe she's being completely genuine. Obviously, she has no way to know. She's just putting suspicions together based on various factors. Now, if there weren't all these other coincidences, I guess we really have to nail down whether or not there really was a photo with the SBTC in Meyer's room in the basement. Because if there was, again, I mean, that could be somebody trying to implicate him as well, but is it strange how often SBTC comes up in this case with all of these different individuals? This is bizarre. It's just bizarre, especially how it's widely reported that it really couldn't be determined what it means, but there's just so many coincidental issues. Another final point here regarding who might have it out for John Ramsey or Access Graphics, or maybe only knowledge of Access Graphics and not John Ramsey specifically. That knowledge could be gained later. On December 21st, there was actually an article published in the Boulder Daily Camera regarding Access Graphics reaching $1 billion in sales. And there was actually a luncheon on December 20th. Coincidentally, Jonbenet Ramsey was appearing in the Rock Around the Clock performance at High Peaks Elementary School on this same day, the 20th. The other thing that's interesting, there was actually another article published in the Boulder Daily Camera on Christmas Eve mentioning the Ramseys' Christmas party. So the Ramseys really are known in the community. So it's just interesting how a lot of these details, if this was a family not in the public eye, perhaps we would be looking at a completely different case here. And again, I mentioned this in other podcasts, but we really do need to do official studies and statistics on how many deathbed confessions end up being true. Because in general, there doesn't seem to be a reason to lie unless you're getting paid money for a family or whatever that would motivate those actions. Whereas if you're not, then it really does seem to be a way for people to clear their conscience of what they know, particularly if they think they might that might help or bring closure or justice in any way. Even if what they're saying isn't necessarily true, if they believe it's true or it could be true, it's just a way of getting more information out there. And then, of course, with different levels of mental stability, or even being coherent, again, depending on how old the individual is or whether or not they have any mental ailments. That all needs to be factored in, of course, but we'll be going over other neighbors and shady characters in the neighborhood. And of course, this is one perplexing case that it's very difficult to be objective, logical, and neutral in examining all theories, but that is the nature of MINDSHOCK, so we will continue to do so. Hope you guys out there found another episode of the MINDSHOCK podcast interesting and informative. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Help us get more mind-shocking episodes out there in a multitude of cases and keep the awareness up, and not just this case, but other cases, cold cases, cases where there has not been definitive justice served or closure. If you like this podcast, you can also hit that like button, share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get a priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications, and any questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire, signing off. Catch you guys next time.